I watched a little clip from a Jordan Peterson interview with Camille Paglia. It's from a few years ago, but I saw it recently on YouTube, and it got me to thinking because he makes a good point, and the point was, um, and he might have been in the aftermath. I can't remember the broader context. It might have been in the aftermath with his Kathy Newman interview. But when you are debating or arguing with somebody, there is a different dynamic between when two men are debating something and when a man is speaking to a woman. And his argument was there's a certain, when two men are interlocutors, they have this kind of understanding that keeps them civil, and it's that if they don't kind of conform to certain rules of discourse, the alternative to communicating and talking to each other, respectfully, is force. And if you transgress that, that is something that is on the table. And that might sound unpleasant to people, but I think if you are naive about that, you're just not understanding human nature. And that is the sticky issue, because I feel like a lot of people who are progressive or would consider themselves on the left think that people are nearly infinitely malleable, just based on how they are socialized. And if there's a spectrum from nature to nurture, they are far off to one side. And I guess that would be the left side, and the left side would be nurture. And defining things or saying that there are certain limits might prickle those sensibilities. And I think it is a balance, right? Because I think if you get too far to any side of that spectrum, I guess, if you think people, who are the people that were compared when I was in school? I think it was like Locke and Rousseau had like ideas about that. But I don't know. I'm not really a philosophy student in that regard, so I'm not going to quote the old dusty tomes, mostly because I'm just not familiar. But yeah, he was basically saying there is, and this is where I'm going to take over. So I think there are social movements that are actively capitalizing on that fact that when you when you fail to have discourse with people reasonably, the alternative is violence. But when the alternative is violence and you're speaking to somebody and it's punching down, it's either, an ethnic minority or a woman, specifically in this case, you can just, the optics aren't good when you I think it's necessary for everybody to conduct themselves in a certain way, and there just seems to be this asynchronous, like, rules for thee but not for me. And I think we need to return to principles. That is my fundamental argument here, is that if you have a principle, that principle applies to everybody. And that when people use language like punching up or punching down, I don't give them credit for good intentions, because I think that is language that is used to game the system. And I think that is irresponsible. So, especially when we are in a society where, we all have to get along, when you have groups of people, I, I think the ideal is that we see ourselves as citizens and we are responsible to each other as citizens. And that is regardless of race or gender or whatever. And some people think that that is idealistic. God, can I just turn off the signal? How does this thing work? Turn off the signal. My high beams are on now. These controls are awful. What was I saying? Yeah, I think there's kind of an active gaming when you're able to talk about certain communities of people and talk about how disenfranchised you are at a certain part, when you are not looking to provide solutions that benefit the whole, but you are trying to get concessions for your group. I feel like not only is that irresponsible, but I think you are undermining yourself because you are using a short-sighted perspective. And I think this perspective is that we need each other. So for men to be at war with women and women get to hold a grudge at men because of present and or historical differences, I think that is very counterproductive. And I think that a lot of the mainstream media preys upon this, and blue-pilled people who I guess feel like they're very integrated with the not the normative culture necessarily, but with what the media and the outlets are saying. I think they are exploiting these fault lines to set people against each other, and if they stuck to principles, I think it would be more obvious to see how this happens. So, if you see yourself as a citizen and you share principles with people, it does not behoove you to alienate sections of the populace, even if they inhabit different strata, social strata, and there's kind of an alignment between that. The conversation that I would want to have is like, if you feel alienated or you feel like you are not being treated as a citizen, I would want to help you. But I feel like the result ultimately is that you have people that have responsibilities that are delegated to a certain part of the populace, and because they are already disenfranchised, right, they are not responsible for addressing those concerns, and their interests are more in getting concessions from the body. I wanted to say body politic, but I don't know what I'm talking about. Just from everybody, like society at large. And I feel like if like the mainstream left currently is organizing in a way that I think is very vulgar and distasteful, and I am alarmed at the number of people that make excuses for it, because I feel like if you here's the symptom. The symptom is that people, I'm not saying that it's just them that are doing this, but they are weaponizing it very articulately, and it's in the media, and if you are not seeing this, you are just willfully blind. It should concern us, and I don't think we prosper as long as we think in terms of this is my group. I am in I consider myself disenfranchised and disempowered. Somebody else has my power, and I need to attack them or take things from them. And so we don't see each other as citizens under the same umbrella where we need to dialogue. Things very easily become about coercion and using the state monopoly on force to get other people to just force them to do what we want. And it's justified because it's punching up. And that's the power dynamic part. I feel like that is really irresponsible, and it starts manifesting these symptoms that make you sound stupid. And I'll give some examples. I was watching, well, I can't remember what channel it was, but basically the idea is everything that's happening right now in the world either is you take a group and jeez, I'm going off the rails. I'll bring it back in. Van Jones was on Bill Maher, and they were talking about impeaching, or not impeaching, but removing Gavin Newsom from office. And he said, don't do it. He's a great guy, blah, blah, blah. I'd like to talk to him in a room about like some of the issues that we're having, and I don't agree with all of his decisions, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, okay, I disagree. I think he's doing a terrible job, but that's not unreasonable. And then Van Jones jumps in and goes like, yeah, this whole thing is a QAnon conspiracy thing. And I go, okay, so you get to call people conspiracy theorists, but everything that you disagree with in society as a leftist is Russia, 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 or white supremacy. And it becomes cartoonish. And I think there's just an alarming lack of self-awareness about these things. And it's just very obvious language that you're using that alienates people. It's designed to alienate people. But I think the only reason people make excuses for it is because it's punching up, or because, well, I guess the same thing. It's not an or. You son of a bitch. That asshole. I can't believe that just happened. Oh, my truck's stuck. Talk about going off the rails. Let's see if I can salvage this. God, I'm so annoyed with that stupid van. Go wide, go wide. There we go, we're back on the road. Yeah, I think it's a certain lack of self-awareness where you take the power out of your own hands, and it gives you license to strike at other people. And if a white person is doing that, which they're totally capable of, that's evil. But if another person is doing that, well, it's okay, and it's activism because it's punching up. And I feel like nothing about that characterization is dishonest. I feel like that is the mentality, and people feel justified in doing that. I don't think I've mischaracterized that at all. So we need to return to principles, because if we want to share a country with each other, and we want to live together, and we want to cooperate, we can't have dialogue like that. And it has been my experience that... nice. Green light. It has been my experience that... I don't want to make myself a martyr, but I feel disappointed when I have these conversations with people, and I feel like I'm running into that kind of blue-pilled wall where you're just like kind of pointing these things out, and a lot of the feedback I get is either, I don't want to hear your conspiracy theories, or that's just your perspective as a straight white male. And I feel like both of those are cop-outs. Because conspiracy theories are the realm that belong to the bad people, and the good people don't have those, even if performatively what they're doing is exactly the same by blaming Russia, or white supremacy, everything, like Wall Street Bets is somehow tied to white supremacy. I skeptically, just as a joke, called that. I was like, here's something that's happening in the news, and these people basically expose this corruption, and the mainstream narrative is going to attach it to Trumpism and white supremacy. And it's going to work because these normies are blue-pilled. And I don't think that they're necessarily stupid. I want to call them stupid because I have hostile feelings towards them. But I think it's just willful ignorance. And how do we chip away at that? How do you get somebody... I don't think you can convince them. And unfortunately, like, my theory, and I think the theory of a lot of people that are for liberty, individual rights, self-determination, stuff like that, we don't want to coerce people. We don't want to coerce people into not thinking that way. We don't want to forcefully re-educate them. But unfortunately, the leftist is justified in using coercion and violence, and they don't recognize that they're doing it because they just use some kind of euphemism for it. I don't know. I don't even want to talk about like specific parties or stuff, but just the general behavior where it's like it should ring an alarm bell when you're holding people to different standards that explicitly, and your excuse for doing so is very thin. And it just seems like, well, if I challenge it, all you have to do is just throw a slur at me. It's just like, well, if you don't agree that Black Lives Matter, you're racist. If you don't agree with this, you're sexist. Blah, 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 blah. And this is very common in discourse. And so I'm not wiping away or ignoring the suffering of people. And just saying like, well, it doesn't matter because, I don't have to see it because of my privilege or whatever the fuck you might say. The argument is more, it does not behoove you to articulate that as a group versus group thing, especially when you want me to care about you as an American. It is antithetical to my values to see the world that way. I think it's very skeptical and very corruptible, and I think the fuel that engine runs on is angst, existential angst and resentment, and it's dressed up as being very noble, but I feel like that facade starts to crumble if you just start recognizing how anybody who wants to have discourse with you or challenge you has some kind of slur or group that they are shunted into, so that you don't need to talk to them. They're a white supremacist. They are a conspiracy theorist. And that applies to such a wide variety of... it just shuts down so many different conversations that I feel like people who participate in that and use that kind of rhetoric are hurting the body politic. And I keep saying body politic, but yeah, I mean that's basically the argument, and it's still just lost on me why people still defend that kind of... It's not even rhetoric, it's anti-rhetoric, it's just anti-communication. It's dishonest. Anyway, I think I've made my point. But yeah, we made it. We crashed into that stupid van, and but I'm up on money, so I don't think I got a ticket this time. Anyways, adios.